In this episode, we are getting into one of the most important but often underestimated ideas in the CompTIA cybersecurity analyst, CySA Plus, world, which is how logs are gathered, moved, managed, and controlled so they can actually help someone defend an environment. New learners often hear the word logging and imagine a passive technical setting buried somewhere in the background, almost like a machine quietly writing notes nobody will ever read. In reality, logs are one of the closest things a defender has to system memory because they preserve traces of what users, applications, services, and devices were doing over time. That is why this topic matters so much. If your environment is producing useful records and those records are being ingested in a reliable way, analysts have a chance to reconstruct events, spot suspicious patterns, and understand what happened before, during, and after a security problem. If the logging picture is weak, late, incomplete, or poorly controlled, then even a smart analyst may be left trying to solve a puzzle with too many missing pieces. A log is simply a recorded event, but that simple definition hides how much value sits inside these records when they are handled well. A login success, a login failure, a file access, a process starting, a configuration change, a network connection, or an application error can all become log entries, and each one tells a very small part of a larger story. Log ingestion is the process of collecting those records from wherever they were created and moving them into a place where they can be stored, organized, searched, and analyzed. Without ingestion, logs remain scattered across endpoints, servers, applications, cloud services, and devices, which makes them much harder to use in real time or during an investigation. That matters because security problems rarely reveal themselves through one perfect clue in one perfect place. More often, a suspicious event becomes meaningful only when it is seen alongside other events from other sources. Log ingestion is what turns isolated records into something much closer to usable evidence, which is why it is foundational rather than optional. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. Seen from the perspective of a Security Operations Center, SOC, logs are not just technical leftovers. They are one of the main ways defenders understand what normal activity looks like and what activity deserves attention. An analyst reviewing an alert is often trying to answer questions such as who did this, from where, at what time, on which system, and what happened next. None of those questions becomes easy if the environment stores its information in separate corners with no consistent way to bring it together. Good ingestion helps create visibility across the environment, and visibility is one of the core ingredients of modern defense. You cannot meaningfully investigate what you cannot see, and you cannot reliably see activity that was never recorded or never made it into a place where people can examine it. That is why log ingestion supports detection, triage, incident response, hunting, and even basic operational awareness. It gives the team a better chance to connect events across time and systems instead of treating every alert like a standalone mystery. The sources of logs are more varied than many beginners first realize, and understanding that variety is part of understanding the work itself. An operating system, OS, can produce records about account activity, service starts, process creation, file changes, and system errors. Applications generate their own records about user actions, failed requests, internal warnings, database behavior, and access attempts. Network devices can record traffic flows, denied connections, routing changes, and unexpected communication patterns, while cloud services may record administrative actions, identity events, and resource changes happening far away from a local data center. Identity systems, email platforms, security tools, remote access services, and web applications can all produce valuable evidence as well. This means an environment is rarely dealing with one kind of log. It is dealing with a whole ecosystem of logs, each showing the world from a different angle. A beginner who understands that point early gains a major advantage, because a security incident often becomes clear only when several of those angles are viewed together. Once you understand where logs come from, The next step is understanding the high-level path they follow from creation to analysis. A system generates an event, some mechanism collects it, the event is transported to a central location, and then it is stored in a form that other people or tools can use. Sometimes that transport is direct and simple, and sometimes it passes through collectors, forwarders, or buffering layers that help prevent data loss when networks are slow or destinations are temporarily unavailable. In many environments, the destination is some form of security information and event management, SIEM, platform, or centralized logging system, but the tool name matters less than the function. The key idea is that the organization needs a dependable way to bring large volumes of records into one manageable environment. If that path is fragile, delayed, or inconsistent, then the team may believe it has visibility when in fact it has only partial visibility. Good ingestion is therefore not just about receiving data. It is about receiving the right data at the right time in a reliable enough way that defenders can trust what they are seeing. A major challenge in log ingestion is that different systems speak in different formats, and raw records are not always easy to compare. One source may store usernames one way, another may label the same idea differently, and a third may produce a record that is technically accurate but hard to search because the structure is inconsistent. This is where parsing and normalization becomes so important. Parsing means identifying the useful pieces inside a raw event, such as the time, the account, the action, the destination, or the outcome. Normalization means reshaping those different records into a more consistent structure so analysts can compare unlike sources without constantly translating them by hand. This matters a great deal in security work because pattern recognition depends on consistency. If one source says account, another says user, and another says principal, that may all mean the same thing, but analysis becomes slower and noisier if those differences are not managed well. Good log ingestion does not only move data. It makes the data easier to understand, correlate, and trust. Time is another critical part of this subject, because logs lose a surprising amount of value when the clocks behind them do not agree. During an investigation, analysts often need to reconstruct a sequence of events across multiple systems, which means they are asking what happened first, what followed, and how quickly things changed. If one system is 5 minutes fast, another is 3 minutes slow, and a third is writing in a different time standard, the timeline becomes much harder to interpret. That is why synchronized time matters so much, and many environments rely on Network Time Protocol, NTP, to keep systems aligned. It is also why organizations often standardize around Coordinated Universal Time, UTC, for logging, even if users live and work in many different time zones. For a beginner, the important lesson is simple. A good log is not just about what was recorded. It is also about when it was recorded and whether that timestamp can be trusted enough to support a real explanation of what happened. Logging control begins where many beginners least expect it, which is not at the moment of investigation, but at the moment of deciding what should be captured in the first place. If you log too little, you create blind spots that may hide suspicious behavior or make later analysis nearly impossible. If you log far too much without purpose, you may drown the team in noise, increase storage costs, and make the important signals harder to see. This is why good logging is not the same thing as logging everything forever. It is about making thoughtful decisions around what events matter most, what level of detail is useful, which systems are most important, and how long different records should remain available. Logging control also includes choices about verbosity, filtering, event categories, and whether certain routine events should be reduced so that meaningful changes stand out more clearly. A mature organization wants enough detail to support defense, but not so much undirected data that the very act of collecting records makes the environment harder to monitor rather than easier. Another side of logging control involves protecting the logs themselves, because records that can be altered easily may not deserve much trust when the pressure is highest. Attackers often try to disable logging, erase traces, or change records to make their actions harder to spot. And even ordinary internal mistakes can damage confidence in the evidence if access is too broad or protections are too weak. That is why organizations think carefully about who can view logs, who can change settings, who can delete records, and whether log storage is separated from the systems generating the events. If an attacker compromises a server, and that same server holds the only usable copy of its own logs, the defender may already be in trouble. Good control means treating logs as important assets rather than disposable byproducts. It also means thinking about integrity, immutability, and separation of duties so that the people operating the environment are not automatically the same people who can silently erase the history of what happened there. Retention is another part of logging control that carries a lot more strategic weight than it may seem at first. Some events matter only for a short period, while others may become important weeks or months later when an incident is discovered long after the initial compromise. If records are discarded too quickly, the team may lose the ability to reconstruct the early stages of an attack or explain how a vulnerability was first abused. If everything is kept without a plan, the organization may spend heavily on storage while still failing to keep the right records accessible in the right way. This is why retention should reflect operational needs, investigative needs, and any legal or compliance expectations that apply to the environment. It is also why some records may be kept in faster, more searchable storage for current work, while older data moves into longer-term archives. The main idea for a beginner is that retention is not only about duration. It is about how long the data stays useful, how easily it can be reached, and whether that choice matches the realities of security operations. There is also an important privacy and sensitivity dimension to this topic, because logs can easily contain more than technical noise. They may include usernames, device identifiers, internal addresses, email details, application requests, location clues, and sometimes even sensitive data that never should have been recorded in full. This creates a responsibility to think carefully about minimization, masking, and access boundaries. The goal of logging is to preserve useful evidence, not to create a second uncontrolled repository of sensitive information. A mature organization therefore asks whether the log truly needs certain fields, whether some values should be partially hidden, and whether access to detailed records should be limited to those with a real need to know. This can be a difficult balance because too much reduction harms investigation, but too little control creates new security and privacy risks. For a CySA Plus learner, this is a helpful reminder that logging is not just a technical collection problem. It is also a governance and risk problem because bad logging choices can create exposure even while trying to improve visibility. When log ingestion and logging control are working well, they make detection and investigation far more effective because patterns become easier to see across systems and time. Imagine a suspicious login occurring from an unusual location, followed by a privilege change, then a burst of process activity on a server, and then an outbound connection to an unfamiliar destination. Any one of those records alone may or may not create urgency, but together they form a much stronger story. That story becomes visible only if the relevant logs were generated, ingested on time, normalized well enough to search, and preserved with enough context to connect the dots. This is why defenders value ingestion so highly. It helps them move from isolated observations to correlated understanding. It also makes life easier during triage, because the analyst can ask whether the activity is limited to one account, whether it touched multiple systems, and whether the sequence fits a benign explanation or something more serious. Good logs do not guarantee perfect answers, but they dramatically improve the odds of reaching the right questions quickly. A common misconception is that turning logging on is the same thing as having a strong logging strategy, but those are very different ideas. An environment may technically generate huge amounts of data and still be weak at detection because the wrong systems are covered, the timestamps are unreliable, key fields are missing, parser errors are common, or ingestion failures happen silently in the background. Another misconception is that more logs are always better. In truth, more unmanaged data can create confusion, delay, and alert fatigue if the organization never decides what it really needs to observe. Some people also assume that a central platform solves the whole problem by itself, when in fact even a strong platform depends on healthy source systems, clean transport, consistent structure, trustworthy access controls, and active review of ingestion health. The lesson here is that logging is a living process, not a one-time technical decision. It needs oversight, validation, tuning, and periodic review, or it will drift into blind spots and noise, just like any other control. By the end of this discussion, The biggest thing to carry forward is that log ingestion and logging control form one of the basic muscles of modern defensive security. Logs only help when the right events are being captured, moved reliably, organized clearly, protected carefully, and retained thoughtfully enough to support real analysis. Once you understand that, this topic stops sounding like background plumbing and starts sounding like what it really is, which is the system that gives analysts much of their sight. A defender cannot make strong decisions with weak visibility, and visibility depends heavily on whether the environment treats logs as valuable evidence instead of scattered technical leftovers. If you can explain where logs come from, why ingestion matters, how control choices shape usefulness, and what makes a log record trustworthy, then you are already thinking much more like a cybersecurity analyst and much less like someone just memorizing security vocabulary for a test.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.